I thought it was just a small kindness, covering a stranger's medicine at a quiet pharmacy. I never imagined it would change the course of my life. But when the old man suddenly grabbed my arm and whispered, "After your son leaves, don't rake the garden," something in his eyes stopped me cold. The next morning, standing at my front door, I saw something that made my heart race, and I knew that warning wasn't random. I'm glad you've joined me for this story. If you're enjoying it so far, you're welcome to like the video, subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Just a heads up, this story blends narrative imagination with life reflections. Certain details may be adjusted, but the themes are shared to invite understanding and perspective. It was a Monday morning in early October when everything began to unravel, though I didn't know it yet. The kind of morning that made you grateful to be alive, cool air, golden light spilling across the cornfields, and the satisfying creak of the porch steps beneath my boots. I'd been waking at 5:30 for more years than I could count. Old habits, Mary used to say, die harder than the men who make them. She'd been right about most things. 5 years gone now, and I still reached for her side of the bed every morning, still brewed 2 cups of coffee, before remembering I only needed one. The Crawford place, my place. Our place stretched out across 240 acres of Kansas farmland. Good land. The kind that knew the plow and gave back more than you put into it. The house itself was nothing fancy, a 2-story farmhouse built from honest timber back in 1947, white paint, peeling in places I kept meaning to fix a barn out back that leaned just slightly to the east like it was listening for something on the wind. From where I stood on the porch, coffee in hand, I could see the whole spread. The equipment shed where my old John Deere sat waiting for spring planting. The chicken coop where a dozen hens were already raising their morning complaints. The cattle pasture where 20 head of Angus grazed in the mist. Mary and I had built this life together, board by board, fence post by fence post, year by year. She passed away 5 years ago, leaving a quietness in the house that I'd never quite gotten used to. Some mornings I still heard her humming in the kitchen. Some evenings I'd set 2 plates on the table before catching myself. The grief had dulled to a manageable ache, the kind you learn to carry without thinking about it too much. I finished my coffee and got to work. The cattle needed checking. The fence along the south pasture had a weak post, and there were always a dozen small repairs waiting for attention. At 68, I moved slower than I used to, but I moved steady. That's what mattered on a farm, not speed, but persistence. By mid-morning, I was examining that fence post when my mind drifted to Brandon, my boy. 38 years old now, though sometimes I still saw him as that kid who'd helped me mend this very fence, asking 1,000 questions about why we did things the way we did. He'd stopped by the farm last Sunday. Unexpected, but welcome. We'd sat on this same porch, shared a beer, talked about nothing in particular. Then, casual as you please, he'd mentioned a new business venture. A restaurant franchise, he called it. Something about investors and expansion opportunities and needing just a little bridge capital to make it all happen. "Maud, I hate to ask, Dad," he'd said, not quite meeting my eyes. "But I'm 5,000 short, just until the investors come through next month. I'll pay you back with interest." $5,000. Not a small amount, but not impossible either. I'd worked my whole life to be in a position to help my son when he needed it. Mary would have wanted that. "You don't need to pay interest," I'd told him. "Family doesn't charge family. But you sure about this venture? Restaurants are tricky business." "It's a sure thing, Dad. I've got it all worked out." I'd written him the check right there. Watched him fold it into his wallet with that smile that reminded me so much of his mother. He'd hugged me before leaving, held on maybe a second longer than usual. "Love you, Dad." "Love you too, son." Now, 3 days later, I wondered if I'd asked enough questions. But then I'd raised Brandon to be independent, to chase his dreams. A father had to trust his boy to make his own way in the world, even if that way looked different from his own. The farm itself was worth somewhere north of $1.2 million, according to the assessor who'd come by last spring. Good land, good water rights, well-maintained buildings. I'd planned to leave it all to Brandon someday. Not that we'd talked about it much, nobody likes thinking about mortality, but it was understood. This land had been in the family for 3 generations. It would pass to the 4th. I spent the afternoon doing what I always did, checking irrigation lines, making notes about which fields would need rotating next season, planning repairs that would wait until after harvest. Honest work, simple work. The kind that let a man's mind wander to good memories. Mary planting sunflowers along the fence line because she liked watching them turn their faces to the sun. Brandon learning to drive the tractor at 14, grinding the gears until I thought they'd fall out, then getting it smooth as butter by the end of summer. The year we built the barn, all of us working together through July heat that could melt steel. Good memories, as the sun started its descent toward the horizon, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. I stood on the porch again with my evening coffee. The land stretched quiet around me. Corn ready for harvest pastures, green from the September rains, sky so big and blue it made you feel small in the best possible way. This was my life. Simple, predictable, good. I had no idea that this routine Monday would be the last peaceful day I'd have for a very long time. Or that my own son had already set plans in motion that would tear everything apart. That afternoon, I made my regular trip into Lawrence to pick up my heart medication. It was a simple errand, one I'd done 100 times before. But this time, an elderly stranger would change everything. The drive took 30 minutes along County Road 47, then onto Highway 59, where the flat farmland gradually gave way to the outskirts of town. Lawrence was the kind of place where everybody knew your name and your business a county seat that had grown just enough to have a Walmart and a few chain restaurants, but still felt like the small town it had always been. Baxter's Pharmacy sat on Massachusetts Street, tucked between a hardware store and a diner that made the best cherry pie in Douglas County. I'd been coming here since Old Man Baxter ran the place back in the 70s. Now his granddaughter Emma worked the counter, a sweet girl in her early 30s with red hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. The bell above the door chimed as I walked in. The pharmacy smelled the way pharmacies always do, antiseptic and vaguely medicinal, with a hint of the perfume display near the front. 2 other customers browsed the aisles and 1 person stood at the counter ahead of me. An elderly man, maybe mid-70s, wearing a faded jacket that had seen better years. His hair was shock white, his frame thin but not frail. He stood very still as Emma rang up his prescription. "That'll be $63.88, Mr. Grayson," Emma said. The old man opened a worn leather wallet and counted out bills. 20, 10, 5 more singles. He counted again, slower this time, then looked up at Emma with something like defeat in his eyes. "I'm short $38.50, he said quietly. "I thought Medicare was supposed to cover, so just so you know, there's a coverage gap this month," Emma explained gently. "I'm sorry. Do you want me to put it back, or can you come in tomorrow?" "It's insulin," he said. "I need it today. I'd been raised to mind my own business, but I'd also been raised to help folks when they needed it." Mary used to say that money spent on kindness was never wasted. Before I could think twice about it, I stepped forward. "Excuse me," I said. "I'd like to cover that for him." Both of them turned to look at me. Emma smiled. The old man's eyes went wide. "Sir, I couldn't—" "It's no trouble at all," I said, pulling out my own wallet. "We all need help sometimes." The old man studied me for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. His eyes were an unusual shade of blue, pale, almost gray, but clear and sharp as winter ice. "Thank you," he finally said. "I'll pay you back when I can." "No need," I told him. Just take care of yourself. Emma rang up both transactions together. His insulin at 63.88, my heart medication at 64.12. I handed her my card, and she processed the payment with practiced efficiency. "You're all set, Mr. Crawford," she said, passing me the pharmacy bag. "Total's 128 even. Your next refill will be ready November 15th. The old man collected his medication, clutching the small white bag like it held something precious, which I supposed it did his life measured out in units of insulin. He nodded to me, started toward the door, then stopped. He turned back. What happened next, I'd replay in my mind 1,000 times in the days that followed. The old man walked straight back to me, his gait steady despite his age. He reached out and gripped my forearm with surprising strength. His fingers were cold through my shirt sleeve. He leaned close, so close I could smell coffee on his breath and see the deep lines etched around his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was low and urgent, meant for my ears only. "After your son leaves tonight," he said, each word deliberate, "don't rake the garden. Let the leaves lie where they fell." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" His grip tightened. "Don't rake the leaves. Promise me." The intensity in his gaze, those pale, piercing eyes, made something cold curl in my stomach. This wasn't the rambling of a confused old man. This was specific. This was a warning. Okay, I heard myself say. He held my gaze another moment, then released my arm and walked away. The bell chimed as he pushed through the door, and just like that he was gone, disappearing down the sidewalk with a speed that seemed impossible for someone his age. I stood there, arm tingling, where he'd gripped it, trying to process what had just happened. "Mr. Crawford," Emma's voice brought me back. "Are you all right?" "That man," I said. "Do you know him?" She glanced at her computer screen. "Arthur Grayson. He's been coming here for a few months. Moved to the area recently, I think. Lives out on Route 12. Has he ever—" I trailed off. "How did you ask if someone seemed strange without sounding paranoid? Does he seem all there?" Emma's brow furrowed. "He's always been perfectly lucid when I've dealt with him. Quiet, polite, why?" "No reason," I said quickly. "Just curious." But it wasn't curiosity that had my mind racing as I walked back to my truck. It was the specificity of Arthur Grayson's words. "After your son leaves tonight." How did this stranger know Brandon was coming to see me tonight? I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. Brandon himself had only called this morning to say he'd swing by after work to pick up some tools he'd left in the barn. And the leaves. What did fallen leaves have to do with anything? As I drove home through the fading afternoon light, Arthur Grayson's words kept echoing in my mind. Don't rake the leaves. What was he trying to tell me? That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Brandon's silver Audi pulled into my driveway. I was sitting on the porch, Arthur's warning still fresh in my mind. I'd been there for the better part of an hour, nursing a beer I hadn't really wanted. The October air had that bite to it that promised frost before dawn. Leaves, oak and maple, mostly carpeted the front yard in rust and gold. They'd been falling steady for 2 weeks, and normally I'd have raked them by now. But tonight all I could think about was an old man's urgent whisper. Brandon's headlights swept across the porch as he pulled up next to my truck. The door opened, and there was my boy, 38 years old, but still looking like he was trying to impress someone. Dark slacks, button-down shirt hair styled with gel. He carried a leather overnight bag. "Hey, Dad." He climbed the steps with easy confidence. Got that from his mother. Mary never met a room she couldn't walk into like she owned it. "Evening," I said, gesturing to the cooler. "Beer's cold if you want one." Sure." He grabbed a bottle, twisted the cap, took a long pull. Then he leaned against the railing, looking out at the darkening fields. "Beautiful night. They usually are this time of year." I studied him. He seemed tense, though he was trying to hide it. Kept shifting his weight, checking his phone. You said you needed those tools from the barn. Yeah, the socket set. Starting that restaurant project next week, need to do some assembly work. I nodded. The restaurant project. The one I'd given him $5,000 for just yesterday. How's that coming along? Good. Real good. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Actually, that's part of why I'm here. Got a meeting in Chicago tomorrow, big investors. Gonna be there through Thursday. 3 days in Chicago, that's some meeting. These guys are thorough. Want to see everything, check all the numbers. He took another drink. But it's gonna pay off, Dad. I can feel it. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But something in his manner, the way he wouldn't quite meet my eyes, the tension in his shoulders, set off alarm bells I couldn't quite name. Well, I hope it works out. We sat in silence for a moment, listening to crickets tune up their evening song. Then Brandon pushed off the railing and looked down at the yard. Man, those leaves are really piling up, he said, casual as you please. You want me to rake them before I go? Won't take long. My hand tightened around the beer bottle. No need. I'll get to it. Now, Dad, there's got to be 4 inches of leaves down there. He gestured at the yard. You leave them much longer, they'll kill the grass underneath. Smother it. He wasn't wrong. That was exactly what happened. If you let leaves sit too long, they formed a mat that blocked sunlight and trapped moisture. It was the kind of thing every farmer knew, the kind of thing I'd taught Brandon when he was 12. I know, I said slowly, but I'm not ready to deal with them yet. It'll take me 20 minutes. I've got time before I head out. Brandon, I kept my voice level. I appreciate the offer, but I'll handle it when I'm ready. He studied me for a long moment, and I saw confusion flicker across his face. This wasn't like me. I'd always been the type to stay on top of maintenance. Letting the leaves sit made no sense from his perspective. Okay, he said finally. Your call. But there was something in his eyes, a flash of frustration maybe, or calculation, that made my skin prickle. It came and went so fast I might have imagined it. Let me grab those tools, I said, standing. We walked across the yard together, leaves crunching under our boots. The barn door creaked as I pulled it open. I found the socket set on the workbench right where it always was. Here you go, I said, handing it over. Thanks, Dad. Brandon took the case, tucked it under his arm. Then he paused, seeming to wrestle with something. Hey, I know I've been asking a lot of you lately. The money, the tools. I just want you to know I'm good for it. I'm going to pay you back and then some. I know you will, son. He stepped forward and pulled me into a hug. I hugged him back, feeling the familiar shape of him, taller than me now, by a couple inches broader through the shoulders. My boy grown into a man I sometimes didn't quite recognize. Love you, Dad, he said into my shoulder. Love you too. He held on maybe a second longer than usual, then released me and stepped back. His eyes were bright emotion, or maybe just the barn's overhead light reflecting funny. I'll call you from Chicago, he said. Drive safe. I walked him back to his car, watched him toss the tools in the trunk. He started the engine, gave me a wave through the window, and pulled out onto County Road 47. The taillights disappeared into the darkness, and I was alone again with the crickets and the cooling air, and a yard full of leaves I'd been told not to touch. I stood there for a long time, staring at those leaves, thinking about Arthur Grayson's cold fingers on my arm, about the urgency in his voice, about how he'd known Brandon was coming tonight when I'd told no one. Finally, as the temperature dropped toward freezing, I went inside and locked the door. Checked it twice, which wasn't like me. Poured myself a whiskey I rarely drank. Sat at the kitchen table with the lights off, watching shadows move across the yard. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't sleep. Brandon's request kept playing on repeat in my mind, along with Arthur's warning. Something was happening, something I didn't understand yet, and whatever it was, it had everything to do with those leaves in my yard. The next morning broke cold and clear. I woke at my usual time, 5:30 a.m., but instead of my normal routine, I found myself drawn to the front window. What I saw there made my blood run cold. Two distinct tracks cut through the carpet of leaves in my front yard, as clear as if someone had painted them there. They ran from the gate curved around the side of the house and disappeared toward the back garden. In the early morning light, with frost beginning to glitter on the grass beneath those tracks, stood out like wounds. I was down the stairs and out the front door in less than a minute, not bothering with coffee or my jacket. The October air bit through my flannel shirt, but I barely noticed. My breath came out in white puffs as I stood at the edge of the porch, staring. Tire tracks, clear as day. The leaves had done exactly what Arthur Grayson must have known they would do. They'd stuck to the tires of whatever vehicle had come through here, adhering to the rubber and creating two parallel paths where the leaves had been pulled away. The tracks were roughly 6 inches apart, consistent with a sedan or small SUV. I followed them slowly, my boots crunching on the undisturbed leaves to either side. The vehicle had entered through the gate, which I always left unlocked, never having had reason not to, and driven straight up toward the house. Then it had turned, following the path around to the back where my garden sat. That's where the real story began to emerge. The tracks stopped at the garden's edge near the old split-rail fence that marked the boundary of my property. Here the vehicle had idled for some time, I could tell from how the leaves had been blown back by the exhaust, creating a small clearing. And here, too, were footprints. Boot prints size 11 or 12 if I was any judge. 2 sets of them, both male based on the depth and stride. They'd walked from the vehicle to the fence, then back again multiple times. The soil near the fence had been disturbed, freshly turned, though someone had tried to smooth it over again. I crouched down, examining the ground more carefully. The disturbed area was maybe 3 feet by 2 feet, like someone had been digging or burying something. But there was nothing there now except freshly turned earth that someone had attempted to disguise. Then I saw the fence. The split-rail fence was old. I'd built it myself 20 years ago, and it had weathered to a silvery gray that blended with the landscape. But one section about 4 feet long looked different, newer. The wood was the same weathered gray, but the joints. I ran my fingers along the join and felt the rough edge of a fresh cut. Someone had sawed through the rails, then put them back together with cheap L-brackets you could buy at any hardware store. It was a decent patch job if you weren't looking closely, but I'd built this fence with my own hands. I knew every inch of it. Someone had cut through my fence, done something in my garden in the middle of the night, then poorly repaired it and driven away. My phone came out of my pocket, almost without conscious thought. I wasn't good with technology, Mary had always handled that, but I knew how to take pictures. I documented everything, the tire tracks cutting through the leaves, the boot prints in the soil, the disturbed earth, the fresh saw marks on the fence. Each photo felt like evidence in a case I didn't yet understand. As I stood there in the cold dawn light, Arthur Grayson's words suddenly crystallized into perfect clarity. Don't rake the garden. Let the leaves lie where they fell. If I'd listened to Brandon last night, if I'd raked up those leaves like any sensible farmer would do, these tracks would be invisible. Gone. Whatever had happened here would have left no trace at all. The vehicle could have driven over bare grass, and I'd never have known it had been here. Arthur had known someone was coming. He'd known they would drive onto my property, and he'd known that those leaves were the only thing that would prove it. But how could an old man I'd never met before yesterday know that someone was planning to trespass on my land the same night my son left town? How could he have known with such certainty that he'd grabbed my arm in a pharmacy and warned me with eyes that burned with urgency? I looked down at my phone at the photos I'd taken. Evidence of what exactly someone had been here, yes. They dug in my garden, cut my fence, tried to cover their tracks. But to what end? The sun was fully up now, burning off the frost, and with the light came the cold realization that I was standing in the middle of something I didn't understand. Something planned. Something deliberate. Someone had waited until Brandon left. They'd known he was leaving, or at least they'd known I'd be alone. They'd come in the middle of the night, done their work, and left. And Arthur Grayson had somehow known it would happen. The cattle needed feeding. The chicken coop needed cleaning. There were a dozen morning chores waiting for my attention, but I couldn't move. I stood there in my garden, staring at those tracks, feeling the weight of questions I couldn't answer pressing down on my shoulders. Someone had been on my property in the middle of the night. Someone who knew Brandon would be gone, and Arthur had known it would happen. But who and why? I needed answers, and I needed them fast. Later that day, unable to shake my unease, I decided to do some investigating of my own. If someone had been on my property last night, maybe one of the neighbors had seen something. But first, I needed to look again. The morning's discovery had shocked me enough that I'd rushed through, more focused on documenting than understanding. Now, with the sun higher and my mind clearer, I returned to the garden. The fence repair looked even worse in full daylight. Whoever had done it had used 4 cheap L brackets, the clearance bin kind, and hadn't bothered to pre-drill the holes. The screws had split the weathered wood in places. It was the work of someone who either didn't know how or didn't care. I ran my fingers along the cut edge again. Clean. Made with a proper saw, then put back together in a hurry. Why? The disturbed soil told me nothing new, but I noticed something I'd missed earlier. Leading away from the fence, back toward where the vehicle had parked, were faint drag marks in the frost-hardened ground, like someone had been pulling something heavy. I took more pictures, though I wasn't sure what good they'd do. By 2 o'clock, I'd finished my chores and changed into a clean shirt. Mrs. Virginia Turner lived 3 properties down County Road 47 in a tidy ranch house that her late husband had built back in the 80s. She'd been widowed for a decade now, but kept the place immaculate. I'd known Virginia since she and Harold moved in. She brought us a casserole when Mary got sick, and another one after the funeral. Good people, the Turners. She answered on my second knock, a small woman with white hair cut short and practical. Reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck. "Isaac Crawford," she said, smiling. "What brings you by? Nothing wrong, I hope." "But actually, Virginia, I was wondering if I could ask you something about last night." Her smile faded. Come in, I'll make tea." Her living room had photos of grandchildren on every surface and a tabby cat curled on the couch. She gestured me to a chair while she disappeared into the kitchen. "Now," she said, returning with 2 cups. "What happened last night? Did you notice anything unusual, any vehicles you didn't recognize?" She settled into her chair, studying me over her teacup. "Funny you should ask. I was up late, my hip was bothering me, and I saw a vehicle go past around 11:30. Driving slow, no headlights. My pulse quickened. No headlights. Well, they had them on dim, like they didn't want to wake people up." She paused. "It's why I noticed. Nobody drives past here that late unless they're lost or up to something." "What kind of vehicle?" "SUV, I think. Dark color black or dark blue, maybe. Couldn't tell you the make. They all look the same to me these days. Did you see which way it went?" "Toward your place," she said quietly. "I watched it pass, and it didn't come back for quite a while. Hour, maybe more." She set down her teacup. "Joseph, what's going on?" "Someone was on my property last night. Cut through my fence, did some digging in the garden." I kept my voice level. "I'm trying to figure out who and why." Her eyes widened. "That's terrible." "Have you called Sheriff Hendricks?" "Not yet. I wanted to gather some information first." I leaned forward. Virginia, I know you have that security camera by your driveway. Any chance it caught something? Oh. She stood immediately. You should have said. Yes, I've got one of those Ring cameras. Harold insisted we get it after there was that string of break-ins over in Douglas County. Let me check. She led me to a small desk where a laptop sat. Her fingers moved across the keyboard as she pulled up the app and scrolled back to the previous night. Here, she said, clicking on a video file. 11:17 p.m. The footage was grainy but clear enough. A dark SUV Toyota or similar rolled past her driveway with its lights barely on. Two people visible in the front seats, but too dark to make out features. The vehicle moved at maybe 10 miles per hour, cautious. Can you fast forward? I asked. She clicked ahead, stopping at 12:43 a.m. The same SUV passed again this time, moving faster, headlights still dim, going the opposite direction, away from my property. Can I get a copy of this? Of course. She fumbled with the controls. I think I can save it to a USB drive. Give me just a minute. While she worked, I studied the frozen frame. The angle was wrong to catch the license plate, and the image quality wasn't good enough to identify the occupants. But it was proof. Solid, time-stamped proof that someone had driven past toward my property at 11:17 p.m. and returned at 12:43 a.m., almost exactly when those tracks must have been made. Here you go, Virginia said, handing me a small flash drive. It's all on there. Joseph, I really think you should call Paul Hendricks. This sounds serious. I will, I assured her. Thank you, Virginia. This helps more than you know. She walked me to the door, her hand on my arm. You be careful. People who sneak around in the middle of the night cutting fences, they're not up to anything good. I know. The walk back to my place took 10 minutes, and with every step, my mind churned. Two people. Dark SUV. Knew exactly when to come after Brandon left. Stayed on my property for an hour and a half doing God knows what. Mrs. Turner agreed to save the footage for me. As I walked back home, my mind raced. Two people had trespassed on my property in the middle of the night. And I had a feeling Brandon knew exactly who they were. That evening, Mrs. Turner called me. Joseph, she said, her voice tense. I think you should come look at the video again. I noticed something. I grabbed my jacket and drove over immediately. The sun had already set by the time I reached her house. The porch light was on, and she opened the door before I could knock, worry written all over her face. I couldn't stop thinking about it, she said, leading me inside. After you left, I kept watching the footage. There's something I missed the first time. Her laptop was open on the desk. The video paused on a single frame. She pointed at the screen. Look here. When the vehicle turns, the streetlight catches the side. At first, I didn't see it. The image was grainy dark. She advanced the video frame by frame, and then it appeared just for a few seconds as the SUV turned onto my driveway. The streetlight illuminated the driver's side door. There was a logo, white lettering against dark paint. Zoom in, I said. She enlarged the image. The pixels blurred, but the words were still clear enough to read. Midwest Property Group. Below it was smaller text, probably a phone number or website, but the company name was unmistakable. A real estate company, Virginia said softly. Why would a real estate company be at your farm in the middle of the night? That was exactly what I was thinking. Can you replay it? Show me the people again. She rewound to when the SUV first appeared and played it in slow motion. Two figures sat in the front seats. Both looked like men from their builds. When they passed under the streetlight, more details emerged. The driver wore a dark jacket. The passenger closer to the camera wore something lighter, possibly a button-down shirt. He held something flat against his chest. Pause it, I said. She froze the frame. That's a clipboard, I said. The passenger's holding a clipboard. We watched the return footage from 12:43 a.m. The angle was worse as they drove away, but details were still visible. The passenger still had the clipboard. Now the driver carried a bag slung over his shoulder, dark canvas, maybe a tool bag. What were they doing? Virginia whispered. I don't know, I said. But I'm going to find out. I pulled out my phone and searched Midwest Property Group, Lawrence, Kansas. The results loaded instantly. The company had a polished website, photos of farmland, smiling clients, glowing testimonials. The About Us page featured a man in his mid-50s, balding, wearing an expensive suit. Philip Garrison, I read aloud. Director, specializing in agricultural land acquisition and development. Virginia leaned closer. Agricultural land. I don't know what it means yet, I said, but my stomach tightened. A real estate company, 2 men, a clipboard, a bag, a cut fence, all in the middle of the night. You need to call Sheriff Hendricks, Virginia said firmly. This isn't right. I will, I said. But I want to look into this company first. She placed a hand on my arm. Be careful, Joseph. People who sneak around at night cutting fences aren't honest people. I know. I handed her the USB drive. Can you save the footage with the logo too? Of course. A few minutes later, she gave it back. I marked the timestamps where the logo is clearest. Thank you, I said. This helps more than you know. As she walked me to the door, her worry deepened. Promise me you'll be smart about this. I promise. The walk home felt longer than usual. The October air was cold clouds hiding the stars. My breath fogged as I walked, my thoughts racing. Why would Midwest Property Group come to my farm at midnight? What were they measuring? Surveying, planning. And Brandon, the timing gnawed at me. He'd been here the day before, oddly insistent that I rake the leaves. Then he'd left town for 3 days. That same night these men appeared. It couldn't be coincidence. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, the one Mary had insisted I buy years ago. I pulled up the company's website again and read everything: services, projects, mission statements, full of polished language about maximizing land value and strategic growth opportunities. I read Philip Garrison's bio. 30 years in real estate, licensed in Kansas and Missouri, member of multiple professional organizations. The photo showed him shaking hands with a politician at a ribbon cutting. Nothing openly criminal. Nothing that explained midnight trespassing. But the more I read, the more uneasy I felt. Legitimate businesses don't sneak onto private land. They don't cut fences. They don't operate under cover of darkness. I opened Google Maps and found their office, a building on Massachusetts Street in downtown Lawrence. A respectable address surrounded by shops and restaurants. That's where I'd go tomorrow. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark kitchen, listening to the house settle. The refrigerator hummed. Pipes creaked softly. Outside, wind moved through the trees, and somewhere far off, a coyote howled. Arthur Grayson's warning echoed in my head. Don't rake the leaves. What did he know? How did he know? And what was buried beneath those leaves that someone was desperate to find? Tomorrow I would confront Philip Garrison and demand answers. But tonight I sat alone with my questions, staring into the darkness, and wondering how many secrets my son had buried, both in the soil and in my life. The following morning, I drove into downtown Lawrence with a knot in my stomach. The Midwest Property Group office sat in a modern glass building on Massachusetts Street. As I pushed through the door, I had no idea I was about to uncover the first layer of my son's betrayal. The lobby was all chrome and polished marble floors, leather chairs, a reception desk that gleamed. A young woman looked up from her computer, professional smile in place. Can I help you? I need to speak with someone about a property appraisal. County Road 47, the Crawford Farm. Her fingers flew across her keyboard. Let me get Mr. Garrison for you. She disappeared through a door. I stood there, hands in my pockets, studying framed photos on the walls. Farmland turned into shopping centers. Each one probably made someone rich while erasing another family's history. Mr. Crawford, I turned to find a man in his mid-50s approaching. Balding, expensive suit, confident smile. Philip Garrison, Director of Acquisitions. Please come to my office. His handshake was firm, practiced. His office matched the lobby, glass desk, leather, everything. He gestured to a chair while settling into his own, pulling up something on his computer. To the County Road 47 property. Beautiful piece of land. Your son Brandon has been very proactive about this sale. What exactly has Brandon told you? I asked. His smile dimmed slightly. He contacted us about 3 weeks ago. Said you were looking to retire, wanted to downsize. He provided the power of attorney and asked us to handle the appraisal. 3 weeks. While I'd been going about my life, my son had been plotting to sell my farm. Can I see that power of attorney? Of course. He turned his monitor, then handed me a printed copy. Everything's in order, notarized and filed properly. I stared at the document. My name, Joseph Robert Crawford. The address correct. Legal description accurate. And at the bottom, a signature that looked remarkably like mine, but it wasn't. Mr. Garrison, I never signed this document. I'm sorry. This is a forgery. I pulled out my wallet, extracted my driver's license, and laid it next to the power of attorney. Look at my signature here. Now look at that one. He leaned forward, studying both. The signatures were similar. Whoever did it knew my handwriting, but the differences were there. The loop on the J too wide. The cross on the T in Crawford angled wrong. These aren't the same, he said quietly. But no, they're not. I never signed anything. I never authorized any sale, and I never gave my son permission to act on my behalf. His face paled. He picked up his phone. Kelly, get me Kyle and Marcus. I need them in my office now. He hung up, looking at me with alarm. Mr. Crawford, if what you're saying is true, it's true. Then we have a serious problem. Except that you sent people to my property at 11 o'clock at night, I said. What? 2 of your employees. Monday night. They drove onto my land, cut through my fence, spent over an hour doing God knows what. We did have a late appraisal scheduled. Your son said you went to bed early, asked if we could come after hours to avoid disturbing you. It was unusual, but he offered to pay extra. How much extra? $500. $500 to get appraisers onto my land while I slept. Except I hadn't been sleeping, I'd been sitting in my kitchen because Arthur Grayson had warned me not to rake the leaves. The door opened, and 2 men entered, both in their 30s, wearing company polo shirts. Kyle and Marcus, according to their name tags. Did you conduct an after-hours appraisal at the Crawford property Monday night? Garrison asked. Kyle nodded. Yes, sir. Mr. Crawford's son requested it. Said his father had mobility issues. Mobility issues, I said flatly. I'm 68, not 90. We drove out around 11, Marcus added. Did a site assessment, soil samples, fence measurements, water access. Standard procedure just after dark. Did you cut through my fence? They exchanged glances. The back section was easier to access that way. We repaired it before we left. With L-brackets and screws that split the wood, I said. Garrison's hands were flat on his desk. Mr. Crawford, I apologize. This is highly irregular and completely unacceptable. You should have known, I interrupted. Legitimate property sales don't happen at midnight. He nodded slowly. You're absolutely right. What can we do to make this right? First, cancel everything. No sale, no listing, no further contact with Brandon. I pulled out my phone. Second, I need copies of everything. The forged power of attorney, the appraisal request, any emails with Brandon payment records. All of it. Of course. He was already typing. Kelly can have that ready in 10 minutes. While we waited, I studied the 3 men before me. They weren't criminals, just businessmen who'd been played by someone they'd believed was legitimate. Kelly brought in a folder thick with documents. I flipped through them, my stomach turning with each page. Brandon's email address, the fake power of attorney, payment receipts showing cash transactions, a preliminary listing price $1,200,000. My farm reduced to numbers on a page. Is there anything else? Garrison asked quietly. Yes. Don't contact Brandon about this meeting. Don't tell him I was here. We can, but you should contact the authorities. This is fraud. Forgery. I know what it is. I'll handle it. As I walked out of that office with a folder full of evidence, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from rage. My own son had tried to sell my farm out from under me, and this was just the beginning. I needed to know how deep this betrayal went. Back at the farm, I spread all the documents across my kitchen table. The forged signature, the emails, the appraisal request. Each piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin of my trust. But I needed to understand why. What had driven Brandon to this? The afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the papers. I made coffee I didn't drink and sat down to examine every page, every detail as methodically as I'd approach any farm problem. Except this wasn't a broken fence or a sick cow. This was my son trying to steal my life. The timeline told its own story. The first email from Brandon to Midwest Property Group was dated September 28th, 3 weeks ago. Subject line, inquiry regarding agricultural property sale. Professional businesslike. He'd introduced himself as acting on behalf of my father, who is interested in downsizing for retirement. Retirement. I was 68 and still running 240 acres on my own. The word was a convenient lie. The second email, dated October 1st, included the forged power of attorney as an attachment. Brandon had scanned it, sent it off as casually as if it were legitimate. The notary stamp was from someone in Kansas City, a place I'd never been, certainly hadn't signed anything. Each subsequent email showed Brandon coordinating details. The appraisal date, the after-hours arrangement, the $500 cash payment. He'd thought of everything, planned it all while sitting across from me on that porch, drinking my beer, looking me in the eye and lying. I pulled out my bank statements, something I'd been meaning to review anyway. There it was, the $5,000 check I'd written him last Sunday. Memo line, restaurant investment. The check had cleared Monday morning, fast, like he'd needed that money immediately. But for what? If he was planning to sell my farm for $1.2 million, why did he need $5,000? I opened my laptop, the old one Mary had insisted I learn to use, and typed Brandon Crawford Restaurant Franchise into Google. Then tried Brandon Crawford Business Chicago. Then just his name with Kansas. Nothing. No business registrations, no restaurant ventures, no investor meetings. The phone number he'd given me, the one he said, was for the franchise headquarters. I'd written it on a post-it note stuck to the fridge. I dialed it now. So the number you have reached is not in service. Please check the number and try again. I set the phone down carefully, though part of me wanted to throw it across the room. Everything was a lie. Every word he'd said about the restaurant, the investors, the Chicago meeting, all of it fabricated. And I'd believed him because he was my son, and you want to believe your children. You want to think you raised them right. But I'd raised a liar, or he'd become one somewhere along the way, and I'd missed it. I thought about the past few months, looking for signs I'd overlooked. Brandon visiting more often than usual, but I'd been pleased by that thought. Maybe he was finally appreciating family after his mother's death. Him asking questions about the farm's value, the property lines, the water rights. But that had seemed like natural interest in his inheritance. Inheritance. That's what this was about, wasn't it? He didn't want to wait for me to die. He wanted it now. But why? What was so urgent that he'd forge documents, hire midnight appraisers, deceive his own father? The debt. There had to be a debt. Something big enough, pressing enough to make a man commit fraud against his family. Gambling, maybe. Bad investments. Something he was ashamed of, something he couldn't tell me about directly. So instead, he'd tried to steal from me. I sat there as the afternoon bled into evening papers, spread before me like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't wanted to solve. And through it all, one question kept circling back. How had Arthur Grayson known? An old man I'd never met who appeared in a pharmacy and warned me with cryptic words that saved everything. Don't rake the garden. Such a strange, specific warning. As if he'd known exactly what Brandon was planning, known the timeline, known that those leaves were my only defense. I'd have to find Arthur again. Thank him properly. Ask him how he'd known. But first I had to deal with Brandon, tomorrow. Brandon had said he'd be back Thursday, home from his fake Chicago trip to his fake investor meetings for his fake restaurant franchise. He'd walk through that door expecting to find his trusting father none the wiser about the machinery turning in the background to steal his land. But I would be waiting. Not as his trusting father anymore, but as a man who'd been betrayed by his own blood. I gathered the documents into a neat stack, returned them to the folder. Tomorrow I'd show Brandon everything, give him a chance to explain, though I couldn't imagine what explanation could justify this. Maybe he'd confess, throw himself on my mercy. Maybe there was some desperate circumstance I didn't know about yet. Or maybe this betrayal went deeper than I feared. Maybe there was more I hadn't discovered yet. More lies, more schemes, more ways he'd been working behind my back. The kitchen had grown dark while I'd been sitting there. I didn't bother turning on the lights. Just sat in the shadows looking at the folder that held proof of my son's crime, wondering how we'd gotten here. Brandon was supposed to return tomorrow. And when he walked through that door, I would be ready. Not as his trusting father anymore, but as a man who'd been betrayed by his own blood. The question was, would he confess, or would this betrayal go even deeper than I feared? Thursday morning arrived gray and cold. Brandon's Audi pulled into the driveway at exactly 10 a.m., right on schedule. I watched from the kitchen window as my son stepped out, checking his phone, relaxed and confident, completely unaware of what waited for him inside. I had been sitting at the kitchen table since dawn, the folder of documents laid out in front of me. I'd rehearsed this moment again and again, searching for words that didn't exist. How do you confront your own child with proof of betrayal? How do you ask why he tried to destroy you? The door opened. "Dad, you home?" Brandon called, cheerful, in the kitchen. He appeared in the doorway with an easy smile, an overnight bag slung over his shoulder. He looked good, rested, like a man whose plans were unfolding exactly as intended. "Hey," he said, stepping forward for a hug. "Chicago was great. The investors loved the pitch. I think we're really going to." He stopped when he saw the papers on the table. "What's all this?" "Sit down, Brandon." Something in my voice made his smile fade. "Dad, what's wrong?" "Sit down." He pulled out a chair slowly. I could see the calculation behind his eyes, measuring what I knew and how much danger he was in. I slid the forged power of attorney across the table. "Explain this." He picked it up. The color drained from his face. His fingers trembled. "Where did you get this?" "From Midwest Property Group. The company you hired to sell my farm." "Dad, I can explain. You forged my signature." I said, my voice steady despite the anger rising inside me. "You tried to sell my property without my consent. It's not like that." "Then what is it like, Brandon?" "Because it looks like fraud. It looks like you tried to steal everything I've built." He set the document down and ran his hands through his hair. For a brief moment I thought he might confess. Instead, his jaw hardened. "You don't understand." "Then explain it." "I need this money," he snapped. "You have no idea what kind of pressure I'm under. What kind of debts I have. So you steal from your father. It's not stealing." He stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly. "I'm your son. This place is going to be mine someday anyway. Why should I have to wait until you die? The words struck harder than any blow. I stood to face him. Because it's mine, I said. Because your mother and I spent 40 years building this, and you wanted to sell it like it meant nothing. It's not nothing, it's worth over $1 million. His voice rose. Do you know what I could do with that money? You don't build anything, I replied. You lie. You forge documents. You sneak around arranging appraisals behind my back. I had a plan, he shouted. Buyers were lined up. We could have closed in 2 months. You'd retire somewhere nice and everyone would be taken care of. Everyone except me, I said, because I never agreed to any of it. He stared at me, breathing hard. And for the first time in my life, I saw contempt in my son's eyes. You're being ridiculous, he said coldly. You're 68 running this place alone. How long do you think you can keep going? 5 years, 10. You're going to work yourself to death out of stubbornness. That's my choice. And it affects me, he shot back. I'm your only child. I have a right. You have no rights here, I interrupted. Not to my land, not to my decisions, and not to my signature. He laughed sharp and bitter. Fine. Keep your precious farm. See if I care. Is that all this was about? I asked. Money. What else is there? He grabbed his bag. I tried to help you, Dad. I tried to make sure you were taken care of. If you want to be stubborn, that's on you. You tried to help yourself. He turned toward the door, then stopped and looked back. The expression on his face made my stomach tighten. You're going to regret this, he said quietly. When you're old and alone. Too proud to ask for help. You'll remember this moment and you'll wish you'd listened. The only thing I regret, I said just as quietly, is not seeing who you really were sooner. He stood there a moment longer, fists clenched, then walked out. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. I moved to the sink and watched through the window as his Audi backed down the driveway, tires spinning on gravel. He didn't look back. The silver car disappeared down County Road 47, leaving only dust behind. The house felt emptier than it ever had, even emptier than those first months after Mary died. As I stood there, his last words echoed in my mind. You're going to regret this. It didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a threat. And deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. Hours after Brandon left, I sat alone in the house that suddenly felt too big, too quiet. I'd given my son a chance to come clean, to apologize, to make things right. Instead, he'd threatened me. The time for second chances was over. I picked up the phone and dialed Sheriff Paul Hendricks. The afternoon had passed in a strange fog. I'd tried to do my normal chores, feed the cattle, check the water troughs, repair a section of fence that needed attention, but my hands moved through the motions, while my mind stayed fixed on that confrontation. On Brandon's face when he realized I knew. On the contempt in his eyes when he told me I'd regret this, Mary would have known what to do. She always did. I found myself at the photo on the mantel, the one from our 30th anniversary. Her smile so alive it still hurt to look at 5 years later. What would you tell me, sweetheart? I asked the empty room. The answer came as clearly as if she'd spoken, protect yourself, Joe. Our son made his choice. She was right. She'd always been right. I picked up the phone and called Virginia Turner first. Virginia, it's Joseph. That USB drive you gave me, I need it. I'm going to the police. There was a pause then. Oh, Joseph, I'm so sorry it's come to this. Of course. Come by whenever you need it. I'll be there in 10 minutes. She was waiting on her porch when I pulled up the USB drive in a small envelope. She pressed it into my hands, her own warm and papery. You're doing the right thing, she said. I know it doesn't feel like it, but you are. Doesn't feel like much of anything right now except wrong. And that boy made his choices. You didn't make them for him. She squeezed my hand. Paul Hendricks is a good man. He'll handle this properly. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and drove into Lawrence. The sheriff's office sat in a brick building on the edge of downtown next to the courthouse. I'd known Paul Hendricks for 15 years. We'd served on the county agriculture board, together shared coffee at the diner most Saturday mornings. Good man, fair man. But I'd never thought I'd be walking into his office to file a report against my own son. The receptionist showed me back immediately when I gave my name. Paul's office was small and cluttered, file boxes stacked in corners, citations pinned to a corkboard, photos of his wife and grandchildren on the desk. He stood when I entered, his weathered face shifting from friendly greeting to concern. "Joseph, Linda said you needed to talk. Everything all right?" "No, Paul, it's not." I sat down heavily in the chair across from his desk. "I need to file a report. Against Brandon." His expression went serious. "Your son. What happened? Where to even start?" I pulled out the folder of documents, set them on his desk. Then the USB drive. 3 weeks ago, Brandon contacted a real estate company about selling my farm. He forged a power of attorney with my signature, arranged for appraisers to come to my property in the middle of the night, and tried to sell everything without my knowledge. Paul opened the folder, started reading. His jaw tightened as he looked at each document. "This is serious, Joseph." "I know. Forgery, fraud, criminal trespass." He looked up at me. "Your son could face felony charges. You understand that?" "I understand." My voice came out steady, though my hands wanted to shake. "But there's more. 4 days ago, a stranger warned me, told me not to rake the leaves in my yard. I didn't understand why until I found tire tracks the next morning, tracks that would have been invisible if I'd cleared those leaves. I told him everything. Arthur Grayson at the pharmacy, the tracks in the leaves, Virginia's security footage, the forged signature, the confrontation that morning, Brandon's threat as he left. Paul listened, taking notes, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. "The video shows the company vehicle," he asked. "Clear as day, logo on the door, timestamp, everything." He plugged the USB into his computer, pulled up the footage. I watched him watch it, saw his professional mask slip for just a moment when the Midwest Property Group logo appeared. They admitted it, the appraisers. In front of their boss, Brandon paid them $500 cash to come after hours. Paul sat back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "Joseph, this is one hell of a case. Multiple felonies, conspiracy. And the defendant is your son. I know what he is. Are you sure you want to do this? Once I start this investigation, once we file charges, there's no taking it back." I thought about Brandon's face that morning. The contempt, the entitlement, the absolute certainty that he had a right to my property, my life's work, just because he was my son. "I'm sure," I said. I gave him a chance to explain this morning. He didn't apologize. He didn't show remorse. He threatened me, Paul. My own son told me I'd regret standing in his way. Paul nodded slowly. "Then I'll open an investigation. I'll need to interview the people at Midwest Property Group, get official statements. I'll need to speak with Mrs. Turner about her footage. This is going to take time to build properly." "How much time?" "A few weeks, probably. We'll do this right, get warrants, document everything. When we bring charges, they'll stick." "A few weeks?" Brandon would still be out there free, knowing I'd discovered his scheme. The thought made something cold settle in my chest. "In the meantime," Paul said, "you be careful. I don't want to alarm you, but people who commit fraud like this, sometimes they don't take exposure well. He already threatened me once. But then take precautions. Lock your doors, vary your routine, and call me if anything feels off." I stood suddenly exhausted. "Thanks, Paul." "Joseph." He came around the desk, put a hand on my shoulder. "You're doing the right thing. I know it doesn't feel like it. But you are." The same words Virginia had said. I wanted to believe them. As I drove home that evening, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. I'd done the right thing, I knew that. But I'd also just set in motion events that would tear my family apart forever. And somewhere in the back of my mind, Arthur Grayson's voice whispered, "This is only the beginning." 2 weeks passed after I filed the police report. Sheriff Hendricks said the investigation would take time, interviews, forensics, building a case. In the meantime, I tried to return to my normal routine. But my body had other plans. It started with fatigue. Then came the dizziness. The first week I chalked it up to stress. Filing charges against your own son will do that to a man. I'd wake at my usual 5:30, but getting out of bed felt like pushing through concrete. The morning chores, feeding cattle, collecting eggs, checking the irrigation, left me winded in ways they never had before. Getting old, I told myself, though 68 had never felt like this. By the second week, new symptoms appeared. Dizziness when I stood up too fast. My heart beating irregular like it couldn't decide on a rhythm. A tremor in my hands that made morning coffee dangerous. I dropped a mug one morning, watched it shatter on the kitchen floor, and had to sit down before cleaning it up. The Robinsons noticed first. They stopped by to drop off some venison from their freezer, found me sitting on the porch in the middle of the afternoon. "Joseph, you feeling all right?" Mr. Robinson asked, concern creasing his weathered face. "You look pale." "Just tired," I said. "Haven't been sleeping well." Mrs. Robinson exchanged a look with her husband. "Maybe you should see Dr. Reynolds. Get yourself checked out." I will if it doesn't get better." But I didn't go. Farmers don't go to doctors for feeling tired. We pushed through. Besides, I knew what was causing it: stress from the investigation, the weight of what I'd done to Brandon, the constant knot of worry about what came next. What I didn't know was that someone was making sure I got worse. Brittany started visiting 3 days after I filed the report. Brandon's wife, 35 years old, with her practiced smile and concerned eyes. She showed up on a Sunday afternoon carrying a casserole dish. "Dad, Joseph," she said at the door. She'd never called me that before. It had always been a polite "Mr. Crawford." "I hope you don't mind me coming by. I know things with Brandon are difficult right now, but I wanted you to know I still care about you." I hesitated, but she looked so earnest standing there on my porch. "Come in," I said. She set the casserole on the counter, chicken and rice, she said, Brandon's favorite. We sat at the kitchen table and she talked about wanting to be a bridge between father and son. About how Brandon was under so much stress, making bad decisions, but he still loved me. About family being more important than anything. It was a good performance. I almost believed it. She started coming by too, sometimes 3 times a week. Always bringing something: homemade cookies, one visit soup the next, fresh bread still warm from her oven. Each time she'd sit with me for a while, asking about the farm, my health, whether I'd heard anything from the investigation. I ate what she brought because turning down food felt rude, and because some part of me wanted to believe that maybe she really did care. Maybe not everyone in Brandon's life had turned against me. What I didn't notice was how the symptoms got worse after her visits. How the tremor in my hands intensified. How the dizziness came in waves that left me gripping the counter for balance. I kept taking my heart medication every morning, the same prescription I'd been on for 3 years, the little white pills in the orange bottle from Baxter's Pharmacy. I trusted that bottle, trusted the system, trusted that at least this one thing in my life was constant and reliable. Virginia Turner came by one afternoon in the second week, found me struggling to lift a feed bag into the truck. "Joseph Crawford, you look terrible," she said flatly. "When's the last time you ate a proper meal? Brittany brought soup yesterday." Brandon's wife. Her expression sharpened. "She's been coming around a couple times a week. Says she wants to help mend things between me and Brandon." Virginia's mouth pressed into a thin line. "And you believe her?" "I don't know what I believe anymore." She helped me load the feed bag, then stood there with her hands on her hips. "You need to see a doctor." This isn't just stress, Joseph. Something's wrong. I'll go next week if it doesn't improve. See that you do. She squeezed my arm before leaving. And Joseph, be careful who you trust. The words stuck with me, but I didn't understand them. Not then. By the end of the second week, I could barely make it through morning chores. The cattle had to wait an extra hour to be fed because I needed to rest after checking the chicken coop. My hands shook so badly I struggled to grip the rake. The dizziness came in waves strong enough that I had to sit down wherever I was, in the barn, on the porch, once in the middle of the field. The Robinsons started checking on me daily. Virginia called twice a day. Even old Walter from the feed store asked if I was feeling all right when I came in for supplies. "You sure you should be driving?" he'd asked, watching me grip the counter for balance. I wasn't sure, but I didn't know what else to do. Thursday afternoon of that second week, Brittany stopped by with more cookies. I was sitting at the kitchen table, too exhausted to pretend otherwise. "Oh, Dad, Joseph," she said, all concern. "You really don't look well. Have you been to a doctor?" "Not yet. You should go, really. I worry about you out here all alone." She left the cookies on the counter, chocolate chip, fresh and warm. After she drove away, I ate 3 of them with coffee I could barely hold steady. By the end of the second week, I could barely make it through morning chores. Something was wrong, seriously wrong. But I never imagined that the answer sat in a little orange bottle on my bathroom counter, and that someone I'd welcomed into my home was slowly poisoning me. 3 weeks after I filed that police report, I collapsed in the barn while feeding the cattle. The Robinsons found me an hour later, barely conscious. That's when everything started to unravel, when the second layer of my son's betrayal came into the light. I don't remember much about the collapse itself. One moment I was pouring feed into the trough, watching the steam rise from the cattle's breath in the cold morning air. The next, my vision blurred, my legs buckled, and the ground was rushing up to meet me. Everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, I was staring at ceiling tiles and fluorescent lights. The steady beep of a heart monitor filled my ears. My mouth was dry, my arms felt heavy, and there was an IV line taped to my hand. The antiseptic smell of the hospital made my stomach turn. "Mr. Crawford." A woman's voice, calm and professional. "Can you hear me?" I turned my head slowly. A doctor in a white coat stood beside my bed, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her name tag read, Dr. Barbara Reynolds. "What happened?" My voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. "You collapsed," she said gently. "Your neighbor found you in your barn and called 911. You've been unconscious for about 2 hours. 2 hours. I tried to sit up, but she placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "Easy. You need to rest. We've been running tests and we found something concerning." She pulled up a chair and sat down, her expression serious. "Mr. Crawford, your blood work shows dangerously high levels of digoxin. Your serum concentration is at 4.2 nanograms per milliliter. The therapeutic range is 0.5 to 2. You're well into toxic territory." "Digoxin," I frowned. "I don't take that." "I know. That's what concerns me." She folded her hands in her lap. "Digoxin is a heart medication, but it's not what you're prescribed. According to your medical records, you take atenolol for your blood pressure. Digoxin is much stronger and much more dangerous if taken incorrectly. At the levels in your system, you could have had a fatal arrhythmia." My mind struggled to catch up. "Are you saying someone gave me the wrong medicine?" "I'm saying someone gave you medicine you shouldn't have been taking at all." Her eyes held mine. "Mr. Crawford, digoxin poisoning doesn't happen by accident. Either someone made a serious error at the pharmacy or—" She paused. "Or someone deliberately substituted your medication." The barn, the collapse, Brittany's visits. I saw her face in my mind, the way she'd smiled when she handed me those chocolate chip cookies still warm from the oven. The way she'd opened my medication cabinet and organized everything so it's easier for you to find Dad. The way she'd stood in my kitchen every single time, watching me take my pills with a glass of water. Don't forget your heart medication. She'd say, her voice sweet and caring. You know how important it is to take it every day. And I'd thanked her. God help me, I'd thanked her for caring. Who has access to your medication? Dr. Reynolds asked. Just me. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. And my daughter-in-law. She's been helping me around the house. Dr. Reynolds nodded slowly, then stood. I need to make a call. Please don't try to leave the room. 20 minutes later, Sheriff Paul Hendricks walked through the door, his face grim. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. Dr. Reynolds filled me in. I'm heading to your place right now to collect that pill bottle. We'll have it tested. He pulled out a small notepad. Who's had access to your house in the last few weeks? Brittany, I said quietly. Brandon's wife. She's been coming by 2 or 3 times a week, bringing food, checking on me. I paused, the weight of it settling on my chest. She reorganized my medicine cabinet about 10 days ago. Hendricks wrote that down. Anyone else? The Robinsons, but they just waved from the fence line. Virginia Turner stopped by once to drop off some eggs. But Brittany, I closed my eyes. She's the only one who came inside regularly. She even knew exactly where I kept my pills. All right. Hendricks tucked the notepad away. I'll be back in a couple hours. Don't talk to anyone about this until we know more. He was true to his word. By late afternoon, he returned with a clear evidence bag containing my orange pill bottle. He sat down in the chair Dr. Reynolds had used earlier. Joe, we opened the bottle and examined the pills. Most of them are atenolol, your regular medication. But about 1/3 of them are digoxin. Someone mixed them together. He held up the bag so I could see. We counted 42 pills total. 14 of them are digoxin. I stared at the bag. Those little white pills looked so harmless, so ordinary. But 1 in 3 had been slowly killing me. We found 2 sets of fingerprints on the bottle. Hendricks continued. Yours, obviously, and 1 other set. We'll need to run those through the system, but... He hesitated. Given what you've told me about Brittany's access to your house, I think we both know whose prints those are going to be. The room felt colder suddenly. She was trying to kill me. We'll know more after the lab results come back. But yes, Joe, that's what it looks like. He stood up. I'm posting a deputy outside your room tonight, just as a precaution. And when you're discharged, I don't want you going back to that farm alone. Not until we've made arrests. After he left, I lay there in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling. The IV drip continued its steady rhythm. The heart monitor beeped, and I thought about Brittany's smile as she handed me those cookies. The way she'd insisted I eat. The way she'd reminded me to take my pills with such practiced concern. I thought about Brandon, too. My son. The boy I'd raised, taught to ride a bike, helped with homework. The man who'd looked me in the eye and asked for money while planning to forge my signature. Who'd threatened me when I stood up to him. Brandon hadn't given up when the forged documents failed. He'd just moved to Plan B, and this time he wasn't trying to steal the farm. He was trying to kill me. 1 week after my collapse, Sheriff Hendricks called with news. We have enough to make an arrest, he said. Brittany's fingerprints are all over your pill bottle, and we found digoxin tablets in her car still in the pharmacy packaging from Lawrence Medical Supply. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt a deep, aching sadness. It was a Tuesday morning when they took her in. I wasn't there to see it, but Hendricks called me afterward to walk me through what they'd found. Brittany's fingerprints matched the ones on my medication bottle, clear prints on the cap, and the label placed there, when she'd carefully mixed those poison pills in with my real medication. The digoxin they found in her glove compartment came in a small amber bottle with no prescription label, the kind you'd get if you knew someone who could get medications without proper documentation. But that wasn't all. In the center console of her BMW, they found a small spiral notebook. Hendricks read me some of the entries over the phone. November 2, added 3 more pills. He didn't notice. It was November 5th. He's getting weaker. Won't be long now. November 8, complained about dizziness. Good. My hands shook as I listened. She'd been documenting it, recording my decline like a science experiment. There's also $500 cash in an envelope, Hendricks added. New bills still in the bank wrapper. We're working on tracing where it came from, but given the timing and everything else. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Brandon had paid her, or promised to pay her. Either way, this wasn't just Brittany acting alone. What happens now? I asked. She's being arraigned this afternoon. The DA's charging her with attempted murder, criminal poisoning, and elder abuse. Bail will probably be set pretty high, I'm guessing $250,000 or more. Her lawyer will argue she's not a flight risk, but with charges this serious. He paused. Joe, she could be looking at 15 to 20 years if convicted. 15 to 20 years for trying to kill me. The woman who'd called me dad and baked cookies in my kitchen. 2 hours after Hendricks's call, my phone rang again. Brandon's name lit up the screen. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. This is insane. His voice exploded through the speaker before I could even say hello. Brittany would never do something like this. She's being set up. Set up, I repeated flatly. Yes, someone planted that stuff in her car. She doesn't even know what digoxin is. His words came fast, desperate. Dad, you have to tell them. You have to tell the police this is a mistake. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered the forged power of attorney, the midnight appraisers, his threat when I confronted him. And I remembered those entries in Brittany's notebook, he's getting weaker. Won't be long now. The only mistake, I said quietly, was mine, for trusting you. Dad! I hung up. My hands were still shaking. Hendricks came by that afternoon with more news. We can hold Brittany on attempted murder charges, he said, standing in my kitchen, where she'd stood so many times before smiling and handing me cookies. The evidence is solid. But Brandon, he shook his head. We don't have enough yet to prove he was directly involved. The money could have been for anything. Without communications between them, without proof he knew what she was doing, the DA says we can't charge him. So he just walks free, for now. Hendricks's jaw tightened. But I promise you, Joe, we're not done. We're getting warrants for his phone records, his bank accounts, everything. If there's a connection, we'll find it. After he left, I stood in my empty house and looked around. This place that had been my sanctuary, my home for 40 years, suddenly felt violated, unsafe. I thought about Brittany standing at this same counter watching me take those pills. I thought about Brandon sitting at this table asking for money while planning to forge my name. By evening, word had spread through the community. Virginia Turner called then the Robinsons, then Walter from the feed store. Everyone wanted to know if I was all right, if I needed anything. Their concern was genuine, but I could hear something else in their voices, too shocked that something like this could happen here, in our quiet corner of Kansas. Mrs. Gladys Morton, who ran the quilting circle Mary used to attend, stopped by with a casserole and tears in her eyes. Mary would be heartbroken, she said, squeezing my hand. But she'd also be proud of you for standing up to them. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Mary. God, what would she say if she could see what our son had become? The next day, I had new locks installed on every door. I set up security cameras around the property, 4 of them covering all the approaches. I even got motion sensor lights for the barn and the driveway. The installer, a young guy from Lawrence, asked if I'd had a break-in. Something like that, I told him. But cameras and locks couldn't fix the real problem. I was living in fear on my own land, looking over my shoulder in my own home. And the worst part, my own son had made me feel this way. That night I sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the fields. The same fields I'd worked for decades. The same view Mary and I had watched together countless times. But nothing looked the same anymore. Everything was tainted. My phone buzzed with a text from Virginia Turner. Heard about the arrest. Are you okay? Come over if you need company. I texted back that I was fine, but I wasn't. Not really. Brittany was in a cell at the Douglas County Jail awaiting her preliminary hearing. But Brandon was still out there free. And I knew deep in my gut that he wasn't done. A man who could forge documents and poison his own father wouldn't stop just because one plan had failed. I was right. The worst was still ahead. 2 days after Brittany's arrest, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Brandon hadn't called, hadn't tried to reach out, and that silence was more frightening than any threat he'd ever made. Sheriff Hendricks seemed to feel the same way. I barely slept those 2 nights. Every creak of the old house made me jump. Every shadow outside the window looked like a figure approaching. I'd installed those security cameras, but now I found myself checking the feeds compulsively every hour, then every half hour, then constantly. The 4 screens sat on my kitchen table, glowing in the dark, showing 4 different angles of my property. Nothing moved except the occasional deer or rabbit, but I couldn't relax, couldn't let my guard down. Wednesday afternoon, Hendricks called. Joe, I wanted to give you a heads up. We've been monitoring Brandon's movements since the arrest. My hand tightened on the phone, and last night he met with someone, a man named Brett Grayson. He paused. We ran the name. Brett's got a record possession with intent to distribute trafficking charges that didn't stick. He's a mid-level dealer out of Kansas City. The kind of guy you don't meet unless you're looking to buy or sell something illegal. Brett Grayson. The name meant nothing to me, but the implications were clear. Why would Brandon be meeting with a drug dealer? I asked, though I already knew the answer wasn't going to be good. So that's what concerns me, Hendricks said. When people like Brandon get backed into a corner, wife-arrested fraud charges pending investigation closing in, they get desperate. And desperate people do dangerous things. He let that sink in for a moment. I want you to be extra careful, Joe. Keep your doors locked. Keep those cameras running. And if you see anything at all, you call me immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself. After he hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at those camera feeds. Brandon was meeting with drug dealers. What was he planning? I called Virginia Turner, told her to keep an eye out for any strange vehicles on County Road 47. She didn't ask questions, just said, I'll watch for you, Joe. You stay safe. I made sure my phone was fully charged. Made sure it was always within reach. I even started keeping it in my pocket when I went out to do the barn work, though my hands shook so badly some mornings I could barely feed the cattle. This wasn't how a man was supposed to live. Not at 68, not on his own land. Thursday evening, just after sunset, Hendricks called again. His voice was tight, urgent. Joe, we got an anonymous tip about an hour ago. Someone reported that there's a plan to plant drugs on your property tonight or tomorrow night. The caller wouldn't give details, but they said it was substantial. Enough to frame you for distribution. My blood ran cold. Frame me. Think about it. You're in the middle of pressing charges against Brandon and Brittany for fraud and attempted murder. If you suddenly get arrested for drug trafficking, your credibility is destroyed. The cases against them fall apart. It's desperate, but it's smart. Can you stop him? We're going to try. I could hear him moving, gathering things. I'm organizing a stakeout tonight. Me and 2 deputies. We'll be at your place by 10 p.m. set up in positions around the property. If Brandon shows up or sends someone, we'll catch them in the act. What do I do? Act normal. Leave the lights on like you're home. We'll park our vehicles out of sight and monitor the cameras from inside your house. If they come, we'll be ready. At 10 p.m., Hendricks arrived with 2 deputies, a younger man named Torres, and a woman named Parker. They moved quietly, efficiently, parking their patrol cars behind the barn where they couldn't be seen from the road. Parker set up in the living room with a laptop connected to my security system. Torres positioned himself upstairs with a view of the driveway. Hendricks stayed with me in the kitchen. How long do we wait? I asked. As long as it takes. He checked his watch. The tip said tonight or tomorrow. Could be hours. Could be nothing. But something in his expression told me he didn't believe it would be nothing. We sat in the dark kitchen, the only light coming from the camera monitors on the table. The house was silent except for the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the occasional crackle of the deputies' radios. Outside, the November wind rustled through the bare trees, making shadows dance across the screens. 11 p.m. passed. Then midnight. My coffee grew cold in the cup. At 12:40 a.m., Parker's voice came through the radio, quiet but sharp. Movement. South fence line. Hendricks stood immediately, hand on his weapon. How many? 2 figures. Coming through the fence near the back pasture. I looked at the screen. There they were, 2 dark shapes moving across my property, one carrying what looked like a bag. Ja, that's them, Hendricks said. Everyone hold position. Let them get closer. We need them on the property with the drugs before we move. My heart hammered in my chest as we watched those figures approach. One was tall, moving confidently. The other, smaller, nervous. Is that Brandon? I whispered. Hendricks leaned closer to the screen. Can't tell yet, but we're about to find out. The 2 figures stopped near the barn. The taller one set down the bag and began pulling something out. Torres, Parker on my signal, Hendricks said into his radio. Then he turned to me. Stay here, Joe. No matter what happens, you stay in this house. And then he was moving silent as a ghost out the back door. I watched the screens, my hands gripping the edge of the table. This was it. After weeks of betrayal, poisoning, and fear, it was finally coming to an end. Or so I thought. Before we explore the scenario of what may have unfolded on this land, I'd genuinely like to hear your perspective. What mystery do you think is waiting for us ahead? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments so we can reflect on it together. A small note before continuing: the next part of the story includes dramatized elements created for educational and storytelling purposes. If this style doesn't suit you, you're welcome to pause the video here. Thursday night. The temperature had dropped near freezing frost coating the fields. I sat in my darkened kitchen, eyes fixed on the newly installed security monitors. Sheriff Hendricks sat beside me with 2 deputies. We had been waiting for 3 hours. Then, at 11:47 p.m., headlights appeared on County Road 47. Vehicle approaching, Parker whispered from the living room. On the screen, a silver Audi rolled slowly down my driveway, headlights off, gliding through the darkness like a predator. It wasn't Brandon's usual black sedan. He'd borrowed this one smart enough to know his own car would be recognized. The Audi stopped near the barn. A tall figure stepped out dressed in black, a baseball cap pulled low, gloves covering his hands. Even through the grainy footage, I recognized the posture, the walk. That's my son, I whispered, my chest tightening. Brandon opened the trunk and pulled out a shovel and a heavy duffel bag. He moved with purpose, heading straight for the back garden, the same area where the midnight appraisers had trespassed weeks earlier. This wasn't improvisation. This was rehearsed. He set the bag down and began digging. About 3 feet deep, just as Hendricks had predicted. Deep enough to hide something, but not deep enough to escape a real search. Hendricks spoke quietly into his radio. All units hold position. Let him finish. We need him with the product. Copy, Torres replied. On the monitor, Brandon reached the depth he wanted. He wiped sweat from his face despite the cold and unzipped the duffel bag. One by one, he removed 5 thick plastic packages filled with white crystalline powder. Methamphetamine. 5 kilograms, enough to ruin lives and send someone to prison for decades. He placed the packages carefully into the hole, arranging them with precision. Then he shoveled dirt back over them, packing it down, smoothing the ground until it looked untouched. When he finished, he nodded to himself and picked up the shovel. Now, Hendricks said. The barn floodlights burst on, flooding the yard with blinding light. Brandon froze. Torres and Parker rushed in, weapons drawn. Freeze, police hands in the air. The shovel fell from Brandon's hands. For a split second, I thought he might run. Then Hendricks stepped into view, and Brandon's shoulders collapsed. On the ground, face down, Brandon dropped to his knees, then flat onto the frost-covered dirt. Parker snapped the handcuffs onto his wrists while Torres kept his weapon trained. Hendricks walked to the disturbed soil and began digging with gloved hands. Within moments, he pulled out the first bag, then the second, third, fourth, fifth. He laid them in a neat row on the grass, the white powder glowing under the floodlights. Brandon Crawford. Hendricks said, his voice calm and firm. You are under arrest for possession with intent to distribute a controlled substance, criminal trespassing, and conspiracy to commit fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Brandon said nothing. They hauled him to his feet. That's when he saw me standing at the kitchen window. Our eyes met across the yard. His face crumpled. Dad, he shouted. Please help me. I didn't move. I couldn't speak. Hendricks guided Brandon to the patrol car. Before closing the door, he leaned in. You want to tell me where 5 kilos of meth came from? Brandon hesitated. Then, through the radio Hendricks had left on my kitchen table, I heard my son begin to talk. I got it from a guy named Brett Grayson, Brandon said, his voice hollow. Kansas City. I met him through gambling. And the plan? Hendricks asked. Brandon let out a bitter laugh. Bury it here. Then make an anonymous tip. You'd search the farm, find the drugs, arrest my dad. Why your father? Because if he's in prison, he can't fight the power of attorney I forged. Convicts can't manage their affairs. I'd become his legal guardian, sell the farm, and pay my debts. How much do you owe? $180,000, Brandon whispered. Poker, sports betting. I borrowed from people who don't forgive. They said if I didn't pay by Christmas, they'd kill me. Through the radio static, I listened as my son explained everything, how he bought the meth, how he researched the amount needed to guarantee federal charges, how framing me was the only way he saw to survive. Did Brittany know? Hendricks asked. Not about the drugs. That was my idea. She just handled the poison to speed things up. We thought if he died naturally, we could keep everything quiet. But when the fraud started unraveling, we needed something bigger. Something that would destroy his credibility completely. Hendricks closed the car door. The confession was over. I stood at the window long after the patrol cars drove away, their red and blue lights fading into the night. My son was gone, not just from my land, but from my life. I knew I'd done the right thing. That knowledge didn't stop my heart from breaking. The house felt unbearably quiet. Yet one question lingered. Hendricks had mentioned it days earlier, almost casually. We got an anonymous tip. Someone had known. Someone had warned the police before Brandon ever dug that hole. Who was it? That question would haunt me until the answer finally came, bringing with it a truth I never could have imagined. 1 month later, I sat in the Douglas County Courthouse watching my son stand trial for crimes I never imagined he could commit. The room was cold and sterile, nothing like the warm farmhouse where I had raised him. As the prosecutor laid out the evidence piece by piece, I understood how completely Brandon had destroyed his own life and nearly ended mine. December 15th, 2024. A date carved into my memory. Judge Patricia Moreno presided, steel-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Prosecutor Sarah Mitchell was young, calm, and relentless. She presented the case with surgical precision. The charges were read aloud: forgery, fraud, possession, with intent to distribute a controlled substance, criminal trespassing, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit murder. The evidence was devastating. Mitchell displayed the forged power of attorney beside my real signature from my driver's license. The differences were obvious: the crooked loop on the J, the uneven spacing, the careless dot in my name. Next came security footage showing the Midwest Property Group SUV arriving on my land at exactly 11:17 p.m. Doctors testified about the digoxin poisoning, how the dosage was lethal, yet subtle enough to mimic heart failure. Then the stakeout footage played. Under bright lights, Brandon was shown digging a hole on my property and burying 5 kilograms of methamphetamine. Phone records followed. Dozens of calls and texts between Brandon and Brett Grayson over 6 months. Messages that left no doubt: got the product. 5 keys, like you said. He's weak now. Another week. Financial records revealed Brandon's gambling debts, $180,000 accumulated over 2 years. Mitchell traced how desperation led him from loans to criminals and finally to betrayal. Then Brandon took the stand. He looked smaller than I remembered, his orange jumpsuit hanging loose, dark circles under his eyes. "How did you meet Brett Grayson?" Mitchell asked. "At a casino in Kansas City," Brandon said. "We played poker." "And when did that change?" "When I couldn't pay him back. He said he could help me for a price." "What price?" "He wanted me to move meth. Said if I hid it somewhere safe, he'd forgive part of my debt." "Where did you hide it?" Brandon glanced at me, then looked away. "My father's farm, County Road 47. I planned to tip off the police, get him arrested, sell the land with the power of attorney, and pay Brett." The courtroom went silent. "You forged the document?" "Yes. I practiced his signature for weeks. Brett knew someone who would notarize anything if you paid enough. And when that didn't work fast enough," Brandon's voice cracked, "my wife suggested poisoning him. Digoxin. We thought it would look natural. Heart failure. He was 68. No one would question it. But he survived." "Yes. He collapsed. Went to the hospital. They found the poison. So I had to move to the final plan, the drugs. And if your father went to prison, I didn't think past surviving. I just knew Brett's people would kill me if I didn't pay." He cried. I felt nothing. When I testified, my legs felt heavy as stone. "Do you love your son?" Mitchell asked gently. "Why, I did," I said. "But I don't recognize him anymore. The boy I raised, he's gone." The defense attorney stood. "Mr. Crawford, did you ever refuse to help Brandon when he was struggling?" "No. If he had asked, if he had come to me and said, 'Dad, I'm in trouble, I need help,' I would have given him everything. The farm, the money, all of it. Because that's what fathers do. But he didn't want my help. He wanted me dead." The jury deliberated 4 hours. The verdict was unanimous: guilty on all counts. Judge Moreno sentenced Brandon to 15 years in federal prison. His wife received 8 years after cooperating with investigators. Brett Grayson was sentenced to 12. When the gavel fell, there was no relief, only silence. I returned to a farm that felt too large and unbearably empty. Yet one question remained, haunting me through sleepless nights and lonely mornings. Arthur Grayson, the man who warned me. He appeared briefly in my life, a stranger with weathered hands and eyes full of regret. He warned me about the leaves, my land, and my son without explaining how he knew. After the trial, I learned the truth. Arthur was Brett Grayson's father. He had spent years watching his son descend into crime and addiction, powerless to stop the spiral. When Brett drunkenly mentioned my farm during a late-night phone call, Arthur recognized the danger. He made an impossible choice, warned me knowing it meant betraying his own blood. He called the sheriff anonymously, set the trap that saved my life and destroyed what remained of his family. He never testified. He vanished after the arrests. No address, no phone number, just a warning that arrived in time. I don't know if that choice absolves him or condemns him. Betrayal can come from those you raise, but salvation sometimes comes from strangers carrying guilt heavier than any prison sentence. Every morning, I walk the fields alone. The land remains. The silence remains. Somewhere an old man carries the weight of a choice that saved my life, even as it destroyed his family, forever etched. 3 weeks after the trial, as winter loosened its grip and early spring crept in, I finally gathered the courage to do what I had avoided for too long. I needed to find Arthur Grayson. I needed to thank him. And I needed to understand how he had known about my son's plan before Brandon had fully committed to it. I drove to Baxter's Pharmacy on a quiet Thursday morning, the same place where the nightmare had first begun months earlier. The bell above the door chimed as I stepped inside. Emma stood behind the counter, her red hair pulled back in the familiar ponytail. "It's Mr. Crawford," she said softly, her eyes filled with sympathy. "I heard about the trial. I'm so sorry for everything you've been through." "Thank you," I replied. "I'm looking for someone. Arthur Grayson. He was here last October when I picked up my heart medication. An older gentleman, probably in his 70s. Recognition crossed her face. "Yes, Mr. Grayson. He came in a few times after that day, but I haven't seen him lately." She hesitated. "Is everything all right? I just need to speak with him. Do you have an address?" She checked the computer, then shook her head. "Only Route 12, no house number. He usually paid cash, so we don't have much information." Before I could leave, an older woman emerged from the back room, wearing a pharmacist's coat. Her name tag read, Gloria Richards. "You're asking about Arthur Grayson?" She asked, her voice gentle but weathered. "Yes, ma'am." She studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Joseph Crawford. I recognized you from the trial coverage in the Lawrence Journal. Arthur's been through more pain than most people should have to bear in one lifetime." "What do you mean?" I asked. She sighed, her expression heavy with old grief. "He lost his son to drugs. Brett Grayson. Arthur tried everything to save that boy." The name hit me like a blow. Brett Grayson, the dealer who supplied Brandon. The man behind the meth buried on my land. He tried everything. Gloria continued, shaking her head. "Rehab counseling, tough love, gentle love, distance, closeness. Nothing made a difference. Brett still ended up dealing to support his habit. Arthur used to come in here and cry while picking up his diabetes medication. Said he felt like he'd failed as a father. When Brett was arrested last year, Arthur was devastated. But I think part of him felt relief too. At least his son was still alive, even if he was behind bars. Arthur had saved me by betraying his own child." "Do you know where he lives?" I asked. "Maple Grove Trailer Park. Route 12, Unit 47. Yellow trailer with blue trim. You can't miss it." 20 minutes later, I pulled into Maple Grove. Arthur's trailer sat near the back, exactly as described. 2 plastic chairs rested on the small wooden porch. I knocked. The door opened almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting. "For Joseph Crawford," Arthur said quietly. "I've been expecting you." Inside his home was small but neat. A kitchenette, a worn sofa, a card table with 2 chairs. Photographs lined one wall, a smiling boy on a bicycle, the same boy in a graduation gown. Then nothing. The timeline stopped as if time itself had ended. Coffee, he asked. Yes. We sat at the small table, two old men carrying heavy truths neither of us had asked for. You saved my life, I said. Twice. How did you know? Arthur stared into his cup for a long moment. My son wasn't a good man. He finally said, his voice heavy with regret. His mother died when he was 12. After that, something broke in him. He got into drugs, young cocaine first, then meth. I tried everything. Intervention treatment centers, prayers. Nothing worked. He became a dealer and cut me out of his life completely. His hands trembled as he held the cup. But when he was drunk or high, he'd call me late at night. Ramble about his business, about the people he used, about his deals. I think somewhere deep down, part of him still needed his father, even if he couldn't admit it when he was sober. And Brandon, I asked. See, one night in October, Arthur said Brett called me at 2 a.m, drunk out of his mind, said he had a big score coming, some desperate farmer's son who wanted to frame his own father for drug trafficking. He mentioned County Road 47, mentioned your farm. He laughed about how desperate people do desperate things. Arthur looked at me, his eyes glistening. Chiqui, when I saw you in the pharmacy that afternoon, when I heard your name, saw where you lived, I knew it was your son Brett was talking about. I had to warn you, even if it meant turning in my own boy. You called the sheriff? Yes, anonymously after your son was first arrested. I gave him enough information to set up surveillance on your property. I told him about the drug plan. Brett called me from jail afterward, screaming that I'd betrayed him. He was right. I did betray him, and I'd do it again. Silence filled the small room. You sacrificed your son to save me, I said. Arthur shook his head slowly. I tried to save everyone, but I failed my son long before that night. Maybe I failed him the day his mother died. Maybe even before that. I don't know anymore. There was something else in his eyes, something deeper. There's more, I said. He nodded slowly. Yes, Joseph. And you need to hear it all. Arthur poured more coffee, his hands steady despite the weight of what he was about to reveal. What I'm about to tell you is a story 50 years in the making. A story about two brothers, a war, and a debt that can never be fully repaid. See, I had a brother, Arthur began. Patrick Grayson, 3 years older than me. He enlisted in 1968 and deployed to Vietnam in 1970. Arthur pulled out an old photograph. A young man in army fatigue standing in front of a helicopter, the resemblance unmistakable. On May 14, 1970, Patrick's platoon walked into an ambush near the Cambodian border. 5 men got cut off from the main group. The platoon leader ordered a retreat, but Patrick went back for them. Arthur's voice cracked. He pulled out 4 men one by one under heavy fire. Then he went back for the last one, a 19-year-old private from Kansas named Robert Hartman. The room tilted. Robert Hartman was my father's name. No Joseph. Arthur's eyes held mine. That was your name. The words hit me like a physical blow. Then fragments surfaced, buried memories I'd suppressed for 5 decades. Jungle heat. Machine gun fire. Someone shouting, "Stay down, kid." Strong hands dragging me, an explosion. "And your full name is Joseph Robert Hartman," Arthur said gently. "You went by Robert before the war. You were drafted at 19, deployed to Vietnam in 1970. Patrick pulled you out of that ambush, saved your life. Then a grenade landed nearby. Patrick threw himself on it. He died saving you and 5 other men." My hands shook. I took shrapnel to the head, spent months in hospitals. The doctors said I had severe PTSD. My family, they started calling me Joseph instead of Robert. Helped me build a new life. I buried Vietnam so deep I almost forgot. Arthur opened a worn folder and laid out military documents. This is Patrick's official report. Look at name number 5. I read the faded typing Private J.R. Hartman, Joseph Robert Hartman, 19 Kansas. Ikokaksue nonsi when I saw your name at Baxter's Pharmacy. Arthur said Joseph Crawford from County Road 47. I went home and checked Patrick's file. I'd memorized every name. There you were, 50 years later. Still alive because my brother died for you. Tears streamed down my face, real sobs I couldn't control. The first time I'd cried since Mary's funeral. When Brett told me about the plot against you, Arthur continued, I knew I couldn't let Patrick's sacrifice be for nothing. I had to save you, just like he did 50 years ago. Even if it meant betraying my own son. We stood and embraced, two old men holding each other up, crying for the brothers we'd lost, for the sons we'd failed, for all the years of pain. My wife Alice died 10 years ago, Arthur said finally. After that, it was just me and Brett. Now it's just me. Not anymore, I said. Not anymore. Epilogue. 6 months later, on a warm September morning, I stood on my porch watching the sunrise. But this time I wasn't alone. Arthur emerged from the guest house, the cottage Mary had always wanted to fix up. I'd renovated it over the summer. Now it was his home. We had breakfast together at the kitchen table talking about Patrick and Mary, about the farm work ahead. Virginia Turner stopped by with fresh bread like every Sunday. The Robinsons waved from their tractor. I'd returned to church, the little Methodist church where Mary and I were married. Arthur came with me. He'd also joined the local VFW chapter, once I'd visited Brandon at Leavenworth. He'd cried, apologized desperately. I forgive you, I'd told him, and I meant it. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, but it meant I wouldn't carry the hate. Use this time to become better, I'd said. I'm leaving the door open, just a crack. The rest is up to you. I hadn't been back since. Maybe someday, maybe not. The farm was still mine, but not for long. My will was updated. The property would go to a veterans charity. The house would become a retreat center. I'd also established the Patrick Grayson Memorial Scholarship Fund for children of veterans who needed help with college. Patrick's sacrifice would continue helping people long after we were gone. That September evening, as the sun painted the sky orange and gold, Arthur and I sat on the porch. Autumn was coming. Leaves drifted down, covering the garden. Arthur looked at the gathering leaves and smiled. Should we rake those up? I laughed, really laughed, deep and genuine. Not yet. Let them lie there a while longer. We sat in companionable silence as the sun set, and crickets began their evening song. Two old men who'd been saved by sacrifice, who'd found each other across 50 years of pain. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt something I thought I'd lost forever. Peace. As I stand here now, reflecting on everything that happened, I have only one honest message for anyone listening. Don't be like me. Don't confuse silence with strength, and don't wait until fear forces the truth into the open. I thought enduring quietly was enough, but it wasn't. God gave me warnings more than once, and I nearly ignored them all. God placed people in my path when I believed I was completely alone. And God showed me through pain and loss that humility can protect what pride quietly destroys. If there's one lesson this family story left me with, it's this: speak before desperation turns into betrayal. My son carried crushing debt yet never asked for help. Pride cost him everything. Another truth I learned from these grandpa stories is that forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. It simply frees your heart from being chained to anger. And above all, legacy isn't land, money, or control. It's the lives you protect, the values you pass on, and the mercy you choose when it still matters. That's what God revealed to me when everything else collapsed. From my own perspective, I believe pain rarely arrives without purpose. This family story didn't end the way I once imagined, but it ended the way it needed to. Stories like these, grandpa stories, remind me that asking for help isn't weakness. It's wisdom passed quietly from one generation to the next. If this family story resonated with you, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments past this video to someone who may need it, and subscribe for more grandpa stories like this. Thank you sincerely for staying with me until the very end. And a gentle reminder, upcoming stories may include dramatized elements created for educational reflection. If this isn't for you, feel free to step away and choose content that suits you better.